Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I guess I should do this formally. Welcome, everyone, to the 2020-2021 Lucille Cobb Memorial Lecture at Doane University. This event is funded annually by an endowment in memory of Dr. Cobb, a professor of English at Doane from 1959 to 1969. The series is intended to broaden public awareness of the art of thoughtful writing by talented authors and scholars. I want to thank my innovative English colleagues at Doane who lead our new integrated humanities program for their gracious assistance in making this special evening a reality. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Doane events team, the Office of Strategic Marketing, and the Alumni Office for their gracious help in coordinating this event. They've helped us tell a compelling story on the way here tonight. The history of the Lucille Cobb Memorial Lecture Series reads like a who's who, but few, if any, have ever shined brighter than the star of tonight's festivities, Dr. Rita Charon. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you happen to be this evening. Welcome especially to everyone in the Doane community, both current students and our alumni who are joining us from around the country and beyond. Following Dr. Charon's remarks, we'll have some time for questions and discussion. You may submit your questions in the chat as they come to you, and we'll do our best to address the spirit of as many as possible. My name is Philip Jude Weidel. I am a professor of English here at Doane University. I am here for a couple reasons, in addition to fielding your questions. First, I had the very great fortune of meeting Dr. Charon at a conference a few years ago. We had an enjoyable conversation and struck up an acquaintance, and she made the mistake of giving me her email address, which is partly why she is with us tonight. I'm also here representing the amazing faculty at Doane University. They are the most dedicated and collaborative group of colleagues that anyone in my line of work could imagine. They are smart, they are professional, they care very deeply for their students and their institution, and they care for one another. I'm very proud to say they are my team. Helping me field questions tonight is our student representative. Nicole Caraher is a sophomore from Gretna, Nebraska. She is studying to be a teacher, majoring in English language arts with an endorsement in English as a second language. She is a member of the honors program, the leadership program, and she is active in theater. She worked last summer as a research assistant on a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, during which she studied the benefits of integrating the humanities and the sciences. Thanks to that work, she knows what most of you know already. The remarkable reputation of our guest tonight precedes her. Dr. Rita Charon is the embodiment of what higher education and healthcare should be about. She affirms the best of who we have been and what we can be in the decades to come. She has built a distinguished career, inspiring teachers, scholars, caregivers, and policymakers to think differently, to innovate, and to do better for the people they serve, which is what led her to pursue a PhD in English after earning an MD from Harvard. I know her as someone who practices what she preaches. She is professor of medicine and founder and executive director of the program in narrative medicine at Columbia University in New York. She literally wrote the book on it, her field. In her own words, narrative medicine is clinical practice fortified by narrative competence, the capacity to recognize, absorb, metabolize, interpret, and be moved by stories of illness. I have that book here on my desk, and my students and I will read it next semester when I teach our new course in narrative medicine. To me, however, more impressive than her amazing list of credentials is how she lives narrative medicine. Its three movements: attention, representation, and affiliation. And she does so when no one is looking, generously and kindly, which is partly why she has been honored by so many organizations and why so many around the world, including some of us here at Doane, point to her as the reason for doing what they are doing. Everyone, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Rita Charon.
Philip Jude Weitzel, thank you so much. I feel very humbled by what you've just said and feel that I have to correct one thing. And that's that this all was done like out of joy and not hard work and toil. There's been a lot of hard work and toil, but the reason that this kind of life feels to me important is how much it elevates all of us together. I love how you describe your colleagues and your students and your love for your institution. I feel very, very privileged to be here with you all. And, you know, I hope I have some things to report to you all. I'm not a stranger to Nebraska. I have visited and have colleagues at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln and continued work there. So I know that I'm among friends and that we can think together through this hour that we have and also in the future, because this work in narrative medicine itself is really just begun. I mean, the thing is only like 20 years old. So we are still very much creating it. Now, in thinking about what, you know, what are we doing in bringing alien disciplines into such practices as medicine and law and business and psychology? What are we doing in bringing these different ways of knowing into the professions? What was Nicole doing in bringing together the humanities and the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? What do they have to do with one another or even for one another? You know, we all know that the past gets bigger. You know, the past, history, civilization. The longer it takes, the longer we go on, the bigger the past gets. Well, it occurred to me recently that the future gets bigger too. Because the more we know, the more we have been through in this elongating past, the more, the more we can look forward to what's going to happen. We know the things that work, the things that don't work, and we simply have a better idea of how vast it is in front of us. And I think the younger you are, the vaster the future looks. I'm pretty sure about that. You know, those of us on the faculty side of universities continue to ask one another, how do we prepare our students for this future? Well, I don't know that it's up to us to prepare them for the future. I think sometimes they're preparing us for the future. I think back and I don't know that my high school teachers or my college teachers prepared me for a future. I think maybe they thought they were, but I think the future prepared me for it. And what I had to do was, as bravely as I could, to submit myself to that future. You know, we all have a lot of kind of, I don't know, bywords of what we think we're teaching our students. And my students tend to be, they can be medical students, nursing students, public health students, they can be graduate students in English, in French, I teach a lot at Columbia. So we hope that we teach our students to be flexible, to be innovative, to be, we call them self-directed learners. We hope we equip them with some kind of confidence in their own wherewithal, some collegiality. But those are the easy things. We also know, and this is the moral imperative, that we have to prepare them with courage, that we have to prepare them with creativity, which is the very most dangerous thing we do, imagining things. We have to provide them with, 360 vision, like to be able to see from all the perspectives, including the ones that don't agree with you. And I think it is our moral duty to prepare them for empathy, which is the capacity to see what others opposed to you even might see or need. We also know that the knowledge itself keeps changing. So the Department of Physiology at Columbia is now, at the medical school, is now the Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics. Thank you very much. The department that used to be physical medicine, this is the physiatrist, right? The Department of Physical Medicine is now the Department of Rehabilitation, fair enough, and regenerative medicine. Got it? So they're not just like treating back pain. They're making it happen that new spine cells can be created. New spinal cords can be created. Do you see? So what we even call our fields of knowledge become our fields of dreams. This is how we grow. This is how we go out on these amazing limbs. And sometimes we fall to say, this is what we can do. Now, okay, so I'm a bioscientist. I'm trained in mainstream academic medicine, Western medicine, allopathic medicine, positivist medicine. I believe in it. I don't practice complementary medicine or integral. I mean, I'm a straight ahead internist. But like Philip said, along the way, I realized that I had to know something more than I knew as a bio major about how stories work. Because I understood that my patients came to me in order that I be able to hear what they told me and what their bodies told me and what their silences told me and what their families told me and what the intern in the emergency room told me. And that I had to, in some way, not just put it together, you know, sloppily, but really have the capacity to inhabit it. Okay? So I think that's why you asked me to come here, because these are two kind of pretty seemingly unmixable fields. And so what happens when you do mix them? I want to tell you some stories. I'm going to tell you stories of two patients of mine within medicine. And I'm going to try to kind of show how some of these knowledges and understandings from outside of medicine make it work. All right? Let me show you how it works. Okay, you see this? Do you see blue words on a screen? Okay. All right. Our task, our work is to see the suffering. We are engaged in seeing the suffering that comes into the office, it comes into the emergency room, that calls us on the phone. We know more about suffering than we used to. Remember, the past is long, the future is longer, and the present is very dense. We know more about suffering than we used to. It's not just the biological, corporeal parts of suffering, but the psychological parts, the social parts, the existential parts, the spiritual parts, the economic parts. And it's not enough as we practice our profession, our craft, it is not enough to be able to look through the patient to recognize which organ is responsible for the symptom. It could have been enough in former times, but we know better now. We have to take in the plight of the person who's come for care. Plight sounds a little dramatic. The situation, the predicament of this person, including the surrounding, the family, including even the public, the communities in which this person lives. Here is an image that you probably recognize. This is from Rembrandt's Prodigal Son. 1669. This is a portion of a larger campus. Many of you may know the story of the prodigal son, the landowner whose two sons are working with him on this estate. When he announces that he is making his will and arranging his inheritance, the younger son says, "I'd like my half now." And the older son remained on the estate helping his father, while the younger son indeed took his inheritance and went out into the world. As you know, he squandered the wealth. He had a loose life. He squandered the wealth. When he had to come back to his father, penitent, penniless, not knowing what would face him, his father sees him coming down the road toward the estate. He says, "Could that be my son? Could that be my son?" And he runs out, the old man, he's old by now, arms out, telling his staff, "Banquet, let's have a banquet. My son has returned." And of course, the older son says, "Father, I've been here all these years. I've made your estate prosper. My younger brother has been profligate and has wasted your wealth. And now he returns. I have not had a banquet." The father looks at the older son. He says, "I know." He says, "You are talking about justice. I am talking about love." He says, "This is my son who was lost, and who was lost is now found." So Luke gives us this parable of justice and love. But why am I telling you this? Because Rembrandt gives it to us much better. Do you see the penitence, the shame, the smallness of the son on his father's breast? Do you see the father's hands, protective now when he finally can be protective again of the son? Do you see the face of the old man, a combination of gravity and relief and sadness and hope? And that son's shaven head, the shame, the shame. This story brings me to an afternoon in Harlem. I was on 125th Street. Harlem is the center of the Black community in New York. I was there for a funeral of a patient of mine who had died. I walk into the funeral parlor and I see 30, maybe 40 motorized wheelchairs in this funeral parlor, more than I'd ever seen in one at once. My patient was in her mid-50s when she died. She had Charcot-Marie Tooth disease, which is a neurodegenerative congenital disease. It has a very complex genetic pedigree, so it's even very hard to test for genetically. The disease usually shows itself when the person is around 14, 15, 16. They get weak in their legs, they get a foot drop, they have trouble walking. They're soon unable to use their legs. They're soon unable to use their arms and their hands. And the disease brings them to an early death, mostly because the respiration is compromised. But here I'm there and I've known her well, and I cared for her sister, I cared for her ex-husband and their child. But here were 30 or 40 brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, all with this disease. It was only in the actual visual appreciation that it came to me, the doctor who's been taking care of several of these family members, that this is a tribal curse, that this is not a disease of each one of them, but a tribal curse. It is not a rare disease, but it is an orphan disease in that it has not had very much research done on it, in part because it's very complex, but nonetheless is not well researched. Now, after that epiphany, it was an epiphany I had, and it was a visual epiphany. I was able to care more effectively for the rest of the family. I then became the doctor for her mother. I became the doctor for not her father, he had passed, but other members of the family. And I was doing so not just to care for the individual body, but also to take account of why is there not more research on this disease. And I got in touch with the neurological service at my hospital. I want to just convey that the visual impact of that moment changed my practice and enabled me, I know, to take more effective care of those in that tribe. So do you see how this was a combination of aesthetics that gave me the news of a better practice? It included the knowledge of biosciences. It included the knowledge of health economics, who decides what diseases get researched and which don't. It required the knowledge of psychology, of family relational dynamics. How, finally, do I conceive of my ethical duties to this family, which do not stop at the threshold of the individual woman, the individual sister, but rather extends toward the community? Here is another goal, that we are hearing our patients' stories, that we are hearing them in their very full complexities. Those of you who teach English, those of you who are linguists, who are rhetoricians, who are creative writers, who are poets, understand how complex stories are. I became a narratologist. That is my field within literary studies. And so we know that in receiving these stories, we are not passively, tuning in, but we're rather inspecting all the time the temporal, the metaphorical, the narrative situations of the stories that are being told to us, that it is not enough to, how can I say this, listen as an ordinary person, that we listen as the close readers that we have come to be through our training, if we're lucky enough to have it. I think this capacity, excuse me, I think this capacity and the need to respect the stories is equally powerful for the lawyer, for the banker, for the senator, those of us who have to affiliate with persons who come to us for some kind of care. Here's a picture of a story. It doesn't look like a story. It is a Earth-sized planet. It is not in our solar system. It's called Kepler 186f. It revolves around an alien sun, not quite as hot as our sun. I love the picture because it shows this planet tumbling into the light. Do you see that? It's tumbling. What is now dark will in a moment be light. And that really is how the story works. It tumbles into the light. Sometimes it can take decades for stories of patients or others to tumble into the light. A patient of mine, this was not long ago, relatively healthy woman, early 70s. She taught in graduate school, a university in New York. And she was, she was fine. She had a little arthritis. She, you know, she'd come in once or twice a year for her pap test and her flu shot. And I get a call on a Monday. I'd never heard her this way. She was completely undone. I got sick, she says, and this is like on the phone, so dramatically. I got sick over the weekend. I had a fever. I had a cough. I figured it was the flu. This was before COVID. She says, so I went to the urgent care, you know, the walk-in doctors. She says, and they examined me, and yes, they told me I had the flu. They gave me some Tamiflu. And then they said, well, we did some blood tests, and you also have diabetes. So we're going to give you some pills, and you should take a pill a day, and you should see your own doctor soon. And this completely undid her. This very, you know, competent, effective, smart, activist, accomplished woman. It undid her. She comes into the office within the next day or so, and she's at the same time furious. I mean, she says, I've been doing everything that I'm supposed to do. I bicycle, I get my vegetables at the organic garden store. She says, I eat salmon. I haven't had a steak in years. I don't eat candy. What are they talking about? I have diabetes. And it had undone her. She says, I know what diabetes does. I know that my aunt had to have a kidney transplant. This was so uncharacteristic. I kind of had to talk her down from this kind of panic. It was like a manic panic. And finally, we were able to get to the point that all of this time, somehow, magically, she thought she'd live forever. And it was this affront to her sense of invulnerability, having done everything she was supposed to do. And by the end of our visit, we were together talking about the worth of the life. I remember we called it the shy worth of the life. I was on a plane the next day. I find myself writing about what had happened. It was a very dramatic interaction. I wrote it down. I wrote a story about it. You know, it was a page and a half of single space type. And then when I got home from my trip, I don't know, I was giving a talk somewhere. I put it in the mail. I put it in an envelope and mailed it to her. She calls me a few days later. She says, every time I read this, I weep. I remember the first line of the story was, two middle-aged women sit in a cramped clinic office in Upper Manhattan. So I made myself kind of a minor character in her story and told the entire sequence up until the point when she and I are together thinking of the shy worth of life. The diabetes, her blood sugar was high because she had a fever and she had the flu, and it took care of itself pretty soon. When she comes in for the next visit, soon after this, I remember that we talked with great relief about the improvement in the blood sugar. And then as I finished writing my note in the medical chart, you know, the electronic record, as I finished writing what I thought had happened in the encounter, I just turned the keyboard over to her and kind of tilted the monitor and said, you finish the note. So the patient finished writing what had happened in the medical visit. And of course, her note was completely different from mine. It was completely different from what she thought she would write. And she then began the experiment with me of learning by writing about herself. So I'm sorry that took such a long time, but it was it was really a revelatory realization of how a major change, and she did fine, and the major change is that she finally agreed to see a psychotherapist that I'd been trying to convince her to do for some time. I thought she would benefit. So what happened there was that I was using my close reading skills. I was using my capacity to imagine what on earth may have caused this amazing disruption, turmoil. Because these stories revolve into the light, I was able to integrate what happened in that moment in the office, along with some of the things that had happened over the years. And in addition to the writerly skills that I brought here were the skills of relationship, the skills of psychological willingness to expose my own thoughts about this, and then her psychological willingness to enter into this with me, that it became a mutuality of task for the two of us. And of course, we also had to deal with the etiological prognostic significance of an elevation in blood glucose, the diagnostic hypotheses. I couldn't tell her she was not going to develop diabetes like her aunt. But we left this very tumultuous time being, and the nouns are not quite there. It's not like she became my friend, not at all. We became a very invested professional team. The next one is Facing Calamity. Jose Ortega y Gasset writes, life is in itself and forever shipwreck. Shipwreck. And we doctors see that. And we're not the only ones. Shipwreck. This is California burning about a month ago. And we know the California fires were physical and metaphorical, that the culture was burning and the bonds of our culture have been weakening and the polarizations have been increasing. And there's predictions of doom from every corner now. In the spheres of medicine, illnesses are random, unfair shipwrecks. Random, unfair devastations. But I have to remember, so is bankruptcy, so is incarceration, so is the loss of faith. These are all forms of devastation. And none of us who care for others can sanitize the reality of the tragedy and its utter complexity. This is where the truth belongs. This is where the witness must appear. Now, I bring this up, of course, because of the time that we're in now in COVID. My friends in the intensive care unit were bringing families to bedsides on their iPhones. So people were dying on FaceTime. And my friends in the emergency department said, Rita, patients are dying in their chairs. So this is a blow. I mean, there's 227,000 now dead in this country. And I bring it up here to say that we have been able with narrative medicine to support and to give a hand to all these clinicians who have been in the midst of the devastation. You know, our colleagues, our doctors, nurses have died by suicide in this epidemic because of their inability to counter it. So that narrative medicine has stepped up. We've been working with the oncologists, with the palliative care doctors, with the pediatricians, with the neonatal intensivists, as well as with big, large publics. I mean, thousands of people have been coming to our narrative medicine Zoom sessions because they get a sense of community. And it's a way to reduce the social isolation, the physical isolation that this tragedy has brought to all of us. And this has taken, now these are somewhat different from the last ones, this has taken an existential awareness that is necessary in responding to, in our case, illness. It's taken as well an artistic and communicative set of skills, an insight into the psychology of these healthcare professionals, as well as knowledge of prior pandemics. And have we not all been reading Defoe and Camus and Boccaccio? We also know that this epidemic has involved persons unequally. So that persons of color, persons of who are poor, are more susceptible to the COVID for many different reasons. So all of these kinds of knowledge have coalesced into some capacity to be of help. Which leads us very naturally into the final task, which is to come to know ourselves. And I'm going to suggest that we come to know ourselves through a combination of Socratic philosophic inquiry, of psychoanalytic inquiry, of contemplative practice, but mostly of creative practice. And it's when you write or when you represent or when you take a photo or when you compose that you come to know yourself. You don't know what you're going to write. It's only when the reader reads what you've written and says, oh, look what you did. Look what you did between the first paragraph and the second paragraph. And you say, I didn't know I did that. Or you take a picture. Here, I've got a photo here that I took of the ocean in Montauk. And I took it knowing, first of all, it kind of reminded me of Rothko, who I love. But it was that the sky and the ocean and the sand were almost the same color. And I so appreciated just the unity of what I saw. And then when I showed it to someone else, they said, yeah, but look, Rita, and they could tell me how this image showed my own desire for a kind of unity. So I hope I've kind of conveyed some of the ways in which these tools that, how can I say, live in many different departments around here, are all coalescing into the care of the sick. And it's, I like to even think in systems terms. I don't know if you all are teaching or practicing systems biology or system thinking, but it is helpful to not be siloed in how we even think of what the problems are, but rather keep very, very emphatically in mind. And I'm going to show you a couple of maps afterwards. Keep very specifically in mind all of the different systems. Now, I've talked about the systems of race and class. I've talked about the systems of psychology, developmental psychology of families. I've talked about neighborhoods. I've talked about, along the way, things like incarceration. All of these systems, however independent they are one from the other, are impinging upon or having to do with the work that I do with patients. So here are ways to look more closely at that. Okay, here's some words. I'm showing you words for the first time. So medicine is in the middle. Now look at the things that impinge on it. Here, let me move this. Okay, so I can see. So medicine is in the middle, but it is being acted upon by the health policy by the legislation, by the economies of health, the economies of cost. Who can afford the kinds of things that we think are most useful in treating an illness? I put the word dividends there because we have to think about, we have to think about who benefits from some of the economy of healthcare. At the bottom, I put, of course, the fund of knowledge. What do we know about disease? Including health beliefs that patients might have that are counter to ours. And then, of course, the workforce. You know, who do we have that can care for the sick? So that's my painting by Sir Luke Fields, the doctor. This is the turn of the, is 1891. And here's the physician on a house call with a sick little girl. It's a poor house. They have mismatched chairs together making a bed. The doctor is looking at this child with a combination of sadness, worry, concern, indecision, doom. And we see the parents in the back already grieving. And if we go ahead 100 years, we have this. This is 2020. This is a NICU. This is where sick children are taken care of. I need say no more, except to say that maybe the doctor in the 1800s was able to give something to his family and child that maybe these blue-clad persons are not able to. Now, the next one shows the disciplines that surround medicine. We literature people are in the aesthetics, poetics, linguistics, rhetoric. Our colleagues in the humanities are involved in history, in psychology, in culture, in social sciences. Our colleagues in STEM are in the science, technology, innovation, discovery. All of these are contributing to what we do intimately. And the philosophy, the subjectivity, the who, what is the personhood of the physician, of the patient that is brought into care? What are our moral duties, our ethical duties? How do we enter into healing relationships with our patients? We see this here, Dorothea Lange. You know this. This is the migrant mother. It's 1936. It's the Dust Bowl. And the photographer was hoping to show the need, to show the dignity, to show the peril of this one person with her two children. I'm not sure if she has a baby on her lap. I'm really not sure. The woman had just sold 2 tires off her car so that she could buy food. So what the artistic, what the aesthetic contribution is here is to so elevate the particular that it becomes universal. And that persons seeing this work of art were able to donate toward the needs of the migrant farmers, or were able to support the WPA legislation that was going on. But that the aesthetics and the activism and indeed the philosophy of care of this artistic work allowed for us to transcend that particular and pay attention to the combination of horrible luck and injustice that had led to this disaster. Now, I've just replaced medicine with all these other things. And this kind of contribution is going on all the time in law, in economics, in education, in policy. You can put what you'd like in the middle oval, but you can know that these practices are similarly gaining by the introduction of these seemingly disparate and seemingly unrelated bodies of knowledge, bodies of practice. And that in the other direction too, that the sciences, the math, the arts, the social sciences, the humanities, the psychology are benefiting from what all of our trades, if you will, all of our professions are able to give. Now, I'm leaving you now with what feels like a very ungoverned set of observations. This is the best picture I could come up with it. This is not, I'm not talking about a Jackson Pollock autumn. However vibrant it is, it's pretty messy. And all that I've been saying over this past piece of time is that it is complex, but it's not disordered. I hope you see that thinking through what is the contribution from literary studies, what is the contribution from history and psychology and social sciences, what is the contribution from philosophy and from ethics in our care of patients. And then I'm also suggesting that the lawyer asks herself that question, and that the teacher asks herself that question, and that the mathematician and the astronomer asks that question. Whoever found Kepler 186f, God bless him. Do you see? So I'm going to leave you with one final image, which is a Jackson Pollock minus the disarray. This is an example of a systems figure. It happens to be about the Afghani war. And this coin, it's, you see the name of this is coin dynamics. Coin is counterintelligence. And they have, the statement of the designers of this chart said, if we were to know all of the arrows on this chart, the Afghanistan war would be over. Got it? So they have in color coded, they have the, this is the Afghani Special Forces, their army. This is those who are supporting them. The US is in here somewhere with the coalition, the domestic support. They've got the government capacity, the tribes of Afghanistan, the beliefs of the populace, the popular support over behind these, somewhere, there it is. We have over here the narcotics. We have the outside support to the insurgents. So this is a very disciplined means of thinking of the systems in our lives. Okay. So I hope you stayed with me in this journey, and I hope it gives us a better vocabulary in some way to think about what are we doing in the teaching, what are we doing in the I'm going to say raising, but in the preparing of students for whatever this future is going to end up as. It's the same that we're doing in our own growing and our own living and our own seeing into this future, which often baffles us, but need not despair us, because the more we can enter it with the fullness of our own capacity to see, the better it will be. So I thank you, and I think there's some time for some questions.
There is. We have a few rolling in. It's really exciting. I'll start with one from a colleague here at Doane. It's a bit long, but I think it's a really thoughtful question. So I'll read it so everyone can hear. It says, thank you very much for sharing such a moving discussion of your work, its origins and its outcomes. I apologize for the long preamble to this question. I study the messages people send to others when they request help overcoming an obstacle they cannot overcome on their own. So necessarily, I also study the stories people tell when they ask others for help. It strikes me that our culture has a lay understanding of narrative, such that people use the word narrative instead of experience when referring to others' experiences that they believe are painful, bad, or unhelpful. It strikes me that in this sense, people use narrative as a mechanism to distance themselves from experiences they believe are harmful. Because you work with people who treat those with medical conditions that might be viewed as painful, limiting, or unwanted, I would appreciate your thoughts about how to encourage people to integrate others' negative experiences using story.
This really unearths a whole family of concerns and possibilities. I think you and I are kind of worrying about some similar things. I kind of despair when I hear the popular use of story. Oh, we're going to tell stories, you know? And there's something a little worrisome to me that some of my medical colleagues are doing story slams and going into, like, you know, clubs in Manhattan and getting up at an open mic and telling stories about what happened in the emergency room tonight. Well, that's not right. And there's a kind of popularizing or a cheapening of, well, here's something that it won't get a laugh. I mean, it's not a comedy club, it's a tragedy club. Ha ha. I mean, this goes on. And I have to be the heavy and say, no, you can't do that. And it's not just HIPAA, it's your moral duty to protect the persons who come to you for care. And you can be sure that there are going to be patients in that audience at that club. You don't have to have a medical license to get in, right? Do you see? So I think some of what you're saying touches on that popular embrace of, oh, what's the story of this company, says the market advertising outfit. We're going to give you a company narrative so that all your workers feel more happy coming to work. No, that's not what stories are. So my ire goes up when I hear people cheapening the, as you say, the fact that these accounts, the accounts that people give of themselves are the most dire, the most tender, precious. You hold them with great care. They're fragile. We know what happens when persons suffer trauma in their lives. They can't even recount it because it's so, it exceeds the boundaries of words. So I don't know if I'm anywhere near what you're saying, but you've unleashed a whole set of very serious considerations. I have to think more about your making the distinction between narrative and experience. I think that's very smart. I have to think about that. Thank you for that question.
Nicole, do you have something?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for attending this. It's a really, really high honor to have you here talking to all of us, even in this weird sort of format that we're kind of playing with. But in the past few sort of months, we've obviously had this prioritization process going on at Doane. And there's just been released not too long ago the list of programs that were recommended for cutting. And there's been a lot of like pain and hurt and concern on both student and faculty sides. Obviously the faculty aren't able to be as outspoken about it as the students are, because they're in a different sort of position. And so we were all like, I've gotten this question from several of my peers just in the past few minutes, and we were all kind of curious as to what your thoughts are on these sort of processes happening in these liberal arts institutions, where these programs that are associated with a liberal arts education are being cut for the sake of money. We were kind of curious as to what your thoughts are on that, and what kind of an impact you would see that having, and if there's a sort of hope moving forward with that.
Well, my whole talk was directed toward that, as you could tell, that the whole point is that these things are not frills, that these things, all told, philosophy, social sciences, history, political science, I don't know what's been cut and what hasn't been cut, but the humanities are under siege, all told. And Doane University is by no means the only one where the leadership is trying to go for a future that is visible instead of the future that is beyond visible. And come on, guys, Google is not going to be the employer of choice forever. So don't think that you're just preparing people to go work for Google. And the humanities particularly, I've also, as you can see, I've been including other disciplines beyond the humanities, because I think they're in the same boat. But the humanities don't, that we somehow haven't, you know, the MLA and all of these big associations haven't quite gotten a way to say, but without us, the world stops existing. And so, you know, medicine suffers, law suffers, economy suffers, governing suffers, human services suffer when we do not have the contributions of these disciplines. Somehow we don't have quite the right arguments, I think, to be making. But I just don't know how a university is able even to do without some of these departments. And I would love to throw my weight behind whatever process is underway to at least take a pause here and map out, like my Afghani war, map out what's going to happen if you close, and I don't know the specifics, but what's going to happen if you close political science, or if you close astronomy, or if you close, I don't know, rhetoric. And down the line, and it's not a long block, down the line, you're going to have people graduating who don't have the equipment to be effective lawyers, teachers, ministers. Is that what they want? So is there any way to have a pause and to have a kind of, you know, discussion and to have village greens? I don't know. It's all very, it's beyond sorrowful. It's really dangerous.
And do you think, this is kind of a little follow-up question that just popped into my head, do you think that the responsibility for fighting for these programs weighs on the students? Because obviously the faculty in a lot of positions, from what I've heard, have their hands tied in a lot of different ways. But students are in a sort of different position. Do you feel like it is?
Well, you know who would be a really good group to get going is the students' parents. Because they've been paying the tuition. I would love to see some activism there. Students are also very vulnerable, because if a student really, you know, makes it clear that they're objecting, I don't know, they don't have a lot of power. I would hope that organizations like the Modern Language Association and the Philosophical Association and the Sociological Association, whoever is involved, could give a hand. But like I say, Doane is not the only one where this kind of thing goes on. Are the students involved in activism? You taking over administration buildings?
Nebraska Nice sometimes gets in the way of that. Let me ask a similar question. It's somewhat related. It's from a colleague you've met, and it's the opposite side of the same coin. You're also an administrator in addition to your other work. What is your approach toward unraveling impossible problems?
Ooh. I don't know that that's answerable. Sometimes you got to take quite a while to walk around it and see if you can find a little crack in it. It's unravelable because you haven't found the thread to pull. The seamstresses among us know that. So you got to find the thread to pull. Oftentimes it means you got to bring people in who haven't been looking at it for a while. So you find really smart people who are really dumb about what you're looking at, and they can help. But there needs to be the will to solve it. And it's the will that is sometimes missing.
To shift gears a little bit, this is from a mutual friend at UNL. She asks, can you talk more about how you and your patient came to, quote, the shy worth of life?
It was a beautiful time in the conversation because she started finally to kind of come down from her panic. And I think maybe I helped her a little bit in saying, well, you know, I've heard you talk about your teaching. I know what you're like in the classroom because you've told me about it. And I've heard you talk about seeing your daughter through that failed marriage. I know that. So I was kind of reminding her about things that she's been so brilliant about and things that that she can treasure, and that she could treasure it even realizing that eventually it will end. I think that was the trap that she was stuck in. And it took the two of us to be kind of marveling at what we've been able to do already. And she joined me in that. I like your image of unraveling. She joined me in that, okay, but it's been good. It's been really good. And that helped break the spell.
Yeah.
But that's the tumbling into light, because to do that, I had to know a fair amount about the past 10 years. So that's my privilege. Please, Nicole.
Yeah, kind of tying to that, that story and that question. Obviously, through your work, you're caring for people at the most terrifying, vulnerable moments of their lives. And obviously, you don't take this responsibility lightly. I'm sure that most physicians don't. But do you feel that this kind of deep sort of empathy when it comes to patient care actually helps in patient healing? And have you seen that in action?
Well, it helps tremendously in that the patients are no longer alone. And the worst possible thing that a doctor can do is abandon a patient. And it happens all the time. Well, I don't really know enough about gastroenterology, so I'm going to send you to my colleague. Okay, that's fine. But it's the abandoning of patients in need that is unconscionable. does it lead to healing? You know, healing is a funny word. Remember I said at the beginning, I'm a straight ahead, Western trained, allopathic, positivistic doctor. And I'm not, you know, how can I say? There's no reason to bring in kind of fringe elements. And so I think that the relationships that can be formed through these, I'm going back to the first question, through these giving accounts of oneself, not telling stories in a cheapened way, but giving accounts of one's true experience, that permits a person to not necessarily get better biologically. It's not going to treat their cancer, but it will give them agency. It's agency that many patients have to do without. Mm-hmm. And so that they have a hand in what is happening. My lady had a hand afterwards in what was happening to her. And I think that is key.
Can I ask a question from my own head? And I just thought of it as you were speaking about agency. We often think, I suppose, of narrative medicine, particularly representation, as the caregiver doing the representation, but from the perspective of the patient, mm-hmm. do you see that as a powerful tool of agency, writing, narrating mm-hmm. experience, yes. sort of externalizing
yes.
what's happening?
And I think more and more of us are doing that. I mean, I love just turning the keyboard around and saying, okay, you write it. And there are many, many ways. I'm working now with a group at MIT to bring patients' voices into the medical record in many different ways. I mean, we're using AI to capture all kinds of things and cohere them. But I mean, there is a growing movement. Patient voices is one of them, where patients can make little videos of themselves and really tell what it is they want their caregivers to know. Patients are reading what's in their medical record, and more of us are finding ways to let them write in it as well. There's also quite outside of medicine, and I don't think medicine has to get involved in this. There are places where patients themselves encourage and curate the writing that goes on. And I've been hesitant to enter that sphere. I don't think doctors belong in these support groups and chat rooms and places where persons who have a particular illness or situation gather. I think I would be an interloper. And I don't think they need me to teach them how to write. But they sure do need for their doctors to read what they've written. And there are quite a few programs doing that as well.
So we have a question from a student and also one of our faculty members as well. I'm kind of merging them. Uh-huh. Have you encountered, I'm sure you have, based on the nature of your field, a sort of like pushback when it comes to the values of bringing in the humanities with medicine? Like the sort of integration of those two things, I can see being an issue for a lot of people, not thinking that they're credible, or basically, how do you convince medical students, healthcare professionals of the value of your work, and have you had to do that?
Well, at the beginning, it was so weird that nobody paid attention to what we were doing. And I was like, the crank out in outer space. And nobody paid attention to the fact that I was taking over medical school courses, and I was including poetry and novels and theater into how the students were learning how to interview patients. But it was not just being a crank, it was being a marginal crank. See, there's great value in being thought of as innocent. So they didn't pay any attention at all. But we were getting the students, and they were increasingly interested in the kind of work that we were opening up for them. At the beginning, it was purely elective, just come if you want. And so we gathered some data, and we found out that the students were able to do some things with patients that they ordinarily would not have been able to do. It is not a surprise that the turning point came when we got a lot of money. And we got the biggest grant that NEH gives, and it allowed me to pay salaries of several of my own colleagues from philosophy and psychoanalysis and literature and whatnot. And that's when we started writing together and really publishing some of the conceptual frameworks. And then it became kind of pretty well known. And my people at Columbia were saying, my friend from Stanford tells me you're great. What is going on here? So it was like, but your questions are absolutely right. That when you try to give, a presentation at Grand Rounds or something, chances are someone will say, Dr. Charon, you may have time to do this, but I sure don't. I just get 9 minutes a patient, and the skeptics are not going to get won over by evidence. They're not as evidence-based as they think they are. They're traditional thinkers, and the interest that the students and the junior faculty have is immense. So it's fine. And I don't waste a lot of time worrying about senior surgeons who are huffy about taking time for this work. It's okay.
Would you say then that it's, once they're huffy surgeons, it's too late, that the work needs to be done at the undergraduate level or even earlier?
No, that's not what I take away.
Okay.
I think it needs to be bottom up and top down. Because the students are only around for a little while. So the students are not going to populate a movement. And if you have, and there are many at Columbia, if you have persons higher up in the structure, if you've got division chiefs and department chairs and course directors and residency program directors, this is the medical side, and I'm sure the same is true in a law school or architecture school or whatever. That is a big deal, because they will not be able to ridicule the younger ones who think this is important. Okay? You can teach a young student a great deal about how to interview, how to talk with patients. All it takes is one word from a cranky attending saying, don't tell me that social history stuff. I don't want to hear that. And the student is not angry at that attending. The student is angry at me. Okay? Yeah. So you do your best to influence those with influence. Right. But you don't stay up all night worrying about it.
There's a question that I'm not sure who it came from, but it's really interesting to me. How does coming to know yourself make you a better doctor?
Oh.
And how can it make each of us better at what we do?
The self is the instrument. Comes with a manual, right? The self is the instrument. It's all you got. And that's true for the scientist in the laboratory, the astronomer finding my Kepler planet. It's true of the mathematician. We cannot be blind to our own our own prejudices, our biases, our blind spots. We can't be blind to that. We can't be ignorant of that because that's what makes mistakes of judgment. And nor ought we, why should we be blind to our gifts? So, you know, we just had a virtual narrative medicine workshop. You know, usually we have it up at the medical school. We have an auditorium, we have lunch, we go out for dinner. And this time it's all on Zoom. It's all on Zoom. But 170 people came and they want to know, how do you do this? And the writing that comes out of these little 3-4 minute exercises is really superb. It's, I didn't know at the beginning, why is this writing so damn good? And I think it's because the writing is about very grave things. So the self is the instrument. And all that you're able to see and do and feel and sense and make happen is because of what you've got, you know, how your consciousness is built, what you're going to notice and not notice, what you're going to worry about and not worry about, what you're going to invent and not invent. So,
yeah.
We have another question here. So this is also another combination of a bunch of different questions, kind of condensed. Given the current circumstances that a lot of universities and students and faculty find themselves in, where there's a lot of talk about the bottom line, there's a lot of talk about money, and a question that has risen a lot is like, how optimistic are you about our culture's ability to rediscover, reincorporate the humanities, especially with the current focus on the bottom line in higher education specifically?
yeah.
Like, do you have a sense of optimism for reclaiming that? Do you feel like more needs to be done? I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
You know, you can't ask that question without remembering that we're in the time of COVID. Our universities have taken real slams. And I don't know that they're going to recover in the shape that they were in. I mean, I don't know. I mean, have you all been, what is the situation? Are your intensive care units full?
No, we've been very lucky in terms of capacity. It's really never been, we've got outbreaks and hotspots, but we've been lucky in terms of medical capacity here for the most part.
So are students on campus?
Yes.
Really? You're in person?
Depends which faculty, which professor, you know.
Okay.
Preference. There's a lot of Zoom.
Okay. All right. I asked that because I'm afraid that many, even of our massive leading universities, are not going to make it at all because the losses have been extraordinary. Now, our peer universities are not firing or laying off faculty. I mean, that's extreme. But the whole shape of who comes to college and what do they do when they get there and who's going to teach them, and do they stay home and you know, live in their high school bedroom? If they do stay home and live in their high school bedroom, no parent with any sense at all is going to fork over $80K for that. So the question you're asking is overshadowed by a bigger question about this pandemic that's not going to stop, guys. It's not going to stop. And have you not been wondering about COVID-21 or COVID-22? You know, I mean, the talk about systems work. The conditions are in place because of all the things that we know about, all of the pesticides in agriculture, lots of things that are in place that allowed for SARS and then COVID and not just coronaviruses, but novel viruses. So I think I'm amplifying the question that you asked. And I think it's no longer a matter of, will cultural anthropology survive? I think it's a matter of, will college survive?
With that in mind, here's a question that's very philosophical, but it reminds me of Van Gogh. Mm-hmm. If I know the history of Starry Night the way I think I might, is there hope when you see the beach from behind bars?
Ooh.
Or does it just hurt all the more?
There's very good work going on in prisons. I don't know if the person is talking about literal prison bars or something metaphorical. I'm not sure. I was just today looking for the name of one of my colleagues in sociology who's been teaching in prisons. We have a very active prison justice program. Kathy Boudin is one of the leaders of it. You remember Kathy Boudin's name. There are college programs within prisons. Persons graduate from college while they're still incarcerated. The good programs, we work with Bard College, and one of the very good programs. People get out of prison and then into graduate school. And they are now teaching. And some of them go back to the prison they were in, and now they're teachers in it. And others are teaching the, students in public health school, students in medical school, about the situation of incarceration and how did this mass incarceration come to be, and what is the if stop and frisk is done much more in Black poor neighborhoods than in white middle class neighborhoods, no wonder the racial fractions are so unrepresentative. I think there's great work being done both in questions of incarceration and in questions of police work. I think that our very smart social scientists or very smart legal minds are thinking very hard about how to reorient police work to things that communities need to do. And, starting with the Exoneration Project, there's been more and more awareness that people on death row don't necessarily belong there, if anyone does. And all of the work that has been done to spring innocent persons from their death sentence. It is like religious in its magnitude. So looking at a scene of beauty through bars is not going to restore a person's sense of the value of his or her consciousness, because the bars are in better focus than the ocean.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, we have another question here. Is there any particular academic discipline that has surprised you in its terms of usefulness for the practice of medicine? Like maybe it wasn't initially apparent to you that it would be helpful, but then it ended up being extremely helpful for you, like as a doctor?
There are two that come immediately to mind. One is very straight ahead continental philosophy. And I didn't grow up reading philosophy, but happily some of my colleagues did. And the orientation toward living that comes from the phenomenologists, Heidegger, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Ricoeur, Levinas. They're the ones who can help me comprehend what it means to live in a body and what it means to be in contact with reality, with the world. And also what it means to meet another intersubjectively. And it can be it can be that this intersubjective meeting takes place as these two persons regard a third thing, so that we actually meet in the Rothko painting, or we meet in The Wings of the Dove by Henry James. The other discipline that we of late have been very committed to is critical race theory, because all of us are especially the whites, are working hard to examine their own privilege, to examine our privilege as whites, to use words like white supremacy, to understand how come me and my family grew up on that side of Academy Avenue, and that person, the Black population in Providence, Rhode Island, where I grew up, all lived on the South Side in the projects. Now, what was that all about? So I think we're belatedly doing a lot of work in discovering the history of slavery, the history of Reconstruction, the history of Jim Crow, the realization that the slavery continues in the practices of, say, redlining by real estate agents, and the like, and inheritance laws that made it difficult for Black families to hold on to their property. So, I mean, especially since May 25th, when George Floyd was killed, there has been a tremendous gearing up of the teaching to us whites, to students at large, making sure that we have the capacity, or at least the, how can I say, the nerve to open questions about justice, injustice, white supremacy in our classrooms. It's not easy. And it's not something that we can just say, well, that's not my job, that's the job. No, it is your job. And it's certainly not something that only the Black students and only the Black faculty have a responsibility to do. Quite the opposite. So, phenomenology and critical race theory are my candidates.
We've danced around politics a little bit. There's been a couple of questions. I want to ask one. What do you think is the most important thing or things for those going into politics to know or to think about the medical field?
Oh, that it is structured and controlled by the moneyed interests. And what a shanda, forgive my Yiddish, that we don't have a universal health coverage. What a terrible, terrible shame that the desires of the shareholders for dividends has overpowered the needs of sick people. And it is the health insurance industry, it is pharma, it is device manufacturers, it is collusion of the FDA. It is not fair. And because of the hold that health insurance, well, it's not only the health insurance, it's the others that I've mentioned. There is so much money to be made in health. You know that. If you go to any financial planner or financial advisor, oh, buy into the health. Where's your portfolio in healthcare? Where's your Merck? Where's your, Pfizer? Where's your, health, illness should not be a money-making enterprise. And even with all the kind of regulations and conflict of interest, and we all have to take our courses in conflict of interest and HIPAA and not taking gifts and all of that. But it rules the place. So I don't know if that helps. I don't know if the committees in Congress can do anything. I doubt it. It is deeply entrenched. And, profit speaks.
I have a question from an English colleague.
Yeah.
Do you see in physician writers like Chekhov or Keats or William Carlos Williams something familiar to your experience, a similar desire or search for some kind of unity between body and text or body and spirit? Do you identify with something in their work?
Yeah. I mean, those narrators in Chekhov, the tenderness. You walk into ward number 6, and don't you feel over your shoulder the comforting arm of your narrator, right? And he's saying, "It's okay, don't worry, come with me. Let's walk up this dirt path into ward number 6." So Chekhov is just such a master. Misery. He's talking to his horse. I mean, it's stunning. I'm going to say one thing that sounds a little snarky. I have to be careful with my medical students who think that because they're a doctor, they're a writer. And the ones who are carrying screenplays in their back pocket. And I have to keep saying, not everybody has a gift. Let's find out if you have a gift. Take a writing workshop. You just go down to Columbia and take a workshop. Find out if you have a gift. It's not automatic. And they kind of think it is. They want to all be Atul Gawande. I say, he's really got a gift. He's a writer. And I say, are you a writer? And they say, well, I write. I say, yeah. I mean, I can be very direct. Say, well, it's kind of rare if you have a gift.
How would you define that? I've actually talked about that distinction with my students, someone who writes versus a writer. How would you define that difference?
I mean, shoot. It's not enough to say we know it when we see it. When we choose things even to teach in narrative medicine, we're often asked by people who come to these workshops, well, how do you decide what poem to teach? And how do you decide what book to read? And I mean, before long, we're all saying, well, it's got to be great. It's got to have depth. It's got to have mystery. It has to be a novel that once you finish it, you start all over and you have to read it again. I mean, these are some of the signposts, right? I mean, the poem. Look, I'm one of the editors for one of the clinical journals, one of the internal medicine journals. I'm one of the humanities editors. And so I get to read the stuff that comes in for the narrative feature, you know, more and more of them. It's not just JAMA anymore. So I get to read the stuff that gets submitted by, it's mostly physicians and medical students. And so much of it is so bad. And it's heartfelt, you know, it's sincere, it's earnest, but it doesn't have a spine, you know, there's nothing going on in the prose. And I write these, I get to write the rejection letters and the accept, and sometimes I accept them. And sometimes, I mean, I've published some really good ones. But the rejection letters are kind of, you know, you got something in mind here. And I know a lot of people, so I'll say, oh, I see you're at Yale. Go find Anna Reisman, go find Lisa Saunders. Don't you know they have that writing workshop for residents? See if you can, let's take a look. Let's see what you can do. Bring this to Anna's writing workshop. And I mean, I know him at Hopkins, I know him at UPenn, I know him all over the place. And it's really fun to, you know, oh, you're at Duke. Well, go to the Trent Center, go find Ray Barfield, you know. But they need teaching. They need a writing teacher. So maybe, you know, all these people who are getting kicked out of university because the university doesn't need them anymore, we'll pick them up in the medical school.
I want to be patient with everyone's time. So how about maybe 2 more questions? Sure. Nicole, do you have one?
Yeah. So we've been kind of talking about, obviously a big focus of this has been integration of different disciplines. I have a question from a student here that he says, there has historically been a distinction between the subject matters, science, humanities, mathematics, history. Are we as a nation attempting to achieve academic advancement, doing ourselves a disservice by segregating these topics? And how can we further interaction between each discipline?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about all night, that there are faces or facets of any discipline that's invisible to those inside it. And it takes an outsider to come in, like we were saying with the unraveling the thread. It takes the outsider to come in and say, oh, but you know, look at this back door. It's just like common sense that an historian is too close to the events of 1619 when the first slave ships got to the shores of Jamestown. And maybe if we bring in a textile scholar, they'll say, well, I can tell where in Africa these groups are from the dye that's used in the textile. I mean, simple things like that. So yes, absolutely. And when I have students who say, oh, I'm going to go to the PhD program at X university, and I'm going to do an interdisciplinary PhD in civilization and textile dyeing, I'll say, don't you do that. If you're going to get a PhD, it needs to be in a real discipline. And I mean, it's an odd, I feel very sure that I think as a literary scholar. I don't think as an historian. I think as a literary scholar. And I want training in how I think. And I don't think if I did a PhD in, you know, illness memoir and the penicillin era, that I would have gotten trained in my craft. So I'm torn on that one. I'm still quite conventional in terms of the disciplines themselves. I sort of made fun of my physiology colleagues who call themselves now physiologists and cellular biophysicists, but they're still physiologists. you caught me in a crack, because I feel conventional about that. At the same time, I feel there's only to be gained by having persons from different disciplines gather together to look at a strange object. What do we got here? What do we got here? You know, in the most utter curiosity, what in the world could it be? Yeah. And, you know, you need an historian, an anthropologist, a sociologist, and a stem cell biologist to look at what you got there.
Maybe that's a good segue to circle back and end near the beginning. What do you see as the greatest, you know, we talked about the peril of higher education, which has been coming, right, long before COVID.
Yes.
What do you see as the greatest opportunity for institutions like Doane?
Well, you could be taking some chances. You could be investing in the kind of fluid work that Nicole was just describing. You know, look at what Stanford's done with their X labs. They've got a BioX lab, and they've got a MathX lab. And it's open space where people come and do wacky projects together. It's open space. So it's not just the organic chemist on one side and the literature people on the other side. So if you're in some kind of peril, maybe that's a time to take chances and not to batten down and not to say, oh, we can probably do without our political scientists. Chance taking, risk taking, that may be counter to the preferences of the leadership.
Like almost using it as a tool to further education rather than...
Yeah. I mean, get those parents together and say, what are we gonna do? We're all in a situation here. And it's not of our making. I mean, you can blame it on the virus. But what are we gonna do here? We got a great university and we're hemorrhaging millions. What are we gonna do here? I don't know. Did they get the faculty together at all for any kind of process? No. Yeah. Is there someone above the leadership? I mean, is there a provost or a chancellor or a something?
We do have a board of trustees that will be, right now, all the cuts are just recommendations. So the powers that be will be deciding. And so we'll see, I suppose, is the answer to that.
Are they influenceable?
Well, this is recorded, so.
We've been trying.
Okay. Yeah.
It is
a time of great peril. It's a time of great peril.
It is. It is 8:45 Central Time, which means it's 9:45 in New York. Dr. Charon, you have been such a wonderful, generous, gracious speaker and teacher, listener tonight. And I think all of us, especially myself and Nicole, have just, this is, you know, this has been one of the highlights of my professional life. And I'm very, very proud to know you. And I'm very, very happy to have shared you with my community and them with you. Thank you on behalf of them. Thank you so much for coming.
And there's lots to do, guys. So
thank you.
Onward.
Thank you.
Okay. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Charon.
Thank you.
Bye.